Hello, everybody. I'm glad you decided to tune in today. And if you don't know me, my name is Jonathan Hunter, and I'm going to switch my image off the screen here in just a minute because I was having some issue with um, the audio visual being out of sync. But I do want to welcome you and say thank you so much for tuning in today. This is the first webinar that we have ever attempted to have, and it's kind of exciting. There's because we decided to do this in webinar format, there is the potential for various people from various missionary families, third culture kid families from around the globe to join and attend and tune in and be watching this. We are going to take about a half an hour here in a little bit to talk about some unique positives of the MK experience. Before we get into anything, I thought just pray for our time that the Lord would keep my mind clear, and then we can move forward. So, Father, I just thank you for this beautiful day, at least in this part of the world that you've given to us. Thank you for the technology that makes this available, Lord. I pray for every missionary kid parent who is tuning in. Lord, I pray for all the situations and family intricacies that exist in this group of people. And Lord, we commit them to your hands. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, I have to figure out if I can remember how to share my PowerPoint screen here with everyone. That's the chat function. The downside of I wanted to do this on the YouTube live stream to start out with, just for ease of access. Potentially, folks who want to tune in can just click the link and boom, and they can access the stream, as well as the feature for the recording, where maybe someone who wasn't available at this time of day can come back and watch it later if they so wish to do so. If we have a limited number of viewers, which I'm not expecting a lot, we can look into the possibility of turning it into more of like a conference call session. The Zoom software is really good for that. In the description, before we go any further, in the description of the YouTube page of the video, the description of the video, there are two things. One of them is an email address, which is just thrivingandresilient@gmail.com. And I've disabled the chat feature for the video, at least I hope I have. So if during the video you have any questions, send them to that email there, and I will be, that's how we'll just take questions for this time around. Second is there's a link for a feedback survey. Please take time to fill out just a little bit of that for me, as I'm not wanting to do these webinars just for myself, but in order to better serve the missionary community. So, all right, so let's go ahead and see if this share screen works. Excellent. All right, thriving and resilient. Conversation on raising MKs, unique positives of the MK experience. I'm not going to read this just read the PowerPoint and not be the presentation, I promise. Anyways, let me briefly just relay to you the very, very, very condensed version of my story, and then we'll move into some of these unique positives. Good chances are, if you're streaming this right now or watching this, you have met me or my family. If you have not, this is a picture of my wife and I. My wife's name is Maggie, and our two MKs, Patrick, who is going to be 6 very soon, and Molly, who just turned 3. And then of our dog, who does not qualify as an MK. She's pure Costa Rican. When I was 6 years old, my family, moved to Ecuador. My parents and my two sisters and I, and my dad works in Ecuador with theological training. My life, as far as I was concerned, was pretty normal. I grew up 1st through 12th grade in Ecuador, and we would travel back and forth from the States. I think we went to the States for home assignment 3 times in the 12 years that we were in Ecuador. And that was all normal to me. It was all really, well, of course, this is what we do. Of course, we go to the States, largely because I began my MK experience when I was 6. The only time my MK experience was really frustrating was when other people didn't realize that this experience was normal. Other people didn't understand because it wasn't normal for them. And that's when I came into some conflict in terms of frustrations about being an MK. Why doesn't everybody just get it? Here's an image of the people group that my parents work with. My friends were Ecuadorians of Hispanic descent, mostly. My dad's friends were indigenous Quechua, and we'd go up with him every so often into the foothills of the mountains and visit churches like this one. I couldn't find an older picture with myself in it. This is more recent with my parents there on the right. And we go up into the mountains, and they would cook for us over an open fire on the dirt floor in a grass roofed hut, which served as the kitchen. And that was really normal. That was how life was. And that was normal for me growing up. It wasn't an, oh my goodness, how in the world could they do this sort of experience like on a short-term missions trip. It was just normal. I moved to the United States for college when I was 18, which is where I met my wife. We went to Moody Bible Institute. And 3.5 years after being married, we moved to Costa Rica. And how fitting is it that we're about to celebrate our 7th marriage anniversary next week. And I do know this. I'm about to celebrate our 7th marriage anniversary, which will mark an equal amount of time spent in the United States married as in Costa Rica married. A lot of the concepts that we'll be talking about today and that you'll hear about throughout any other sessions that you choose to attend are going to be based on this book, Third Culture Kids, which was written by Dave Pollock and Ruth Van Reken. And Dave Pollock really pioneered this idea that there was something about students, about kids who grew up in other countries that linked them together. There were so many commonalities between kids from different nationalities living in various countries that brought them together. And so he coined this term, Third Culture Kids. And when we were getting ready to move to Costa Rica, Maggie was reading this book and kept saying, well, this is you, and I totally see you in this book. And I kept denying it because I was so normal, and I didn't come out of my MK experience having a lot of difficulties at college. I had my share, but I mean, I had a pretty smooth transition back. And it wasn't until I read the book myself, after she had, that so many of my experiences through my life kind of came into focus. It was like I was living life, needing glasses, but without glasses, and seeing the world as blurry. And just it was normal for me. But when I put on glasses, I was able to look at some of the experience I had through the lens of this book, and see some of the interactions that I had with people, or realize characteristics that I have today aren't terribly unique to me. It's normal when you put on the glasses, things kind of tend to sharpen and come into focus in a way they hadn't before. And that was kind of a moment for me when I read this book for the first time when I was in probably about like 23 years old. And that got us really interested, along with the fact that we were planning on coming to Costa Rica to work with an international youth group of missionary kids and third culture kids and English-speaking Costa Ricans. It got me really interested in pursuing more. What is this world of third culture kids, and what really are some of those underlying foundations that make us so similar? I'm going to go ahead and look at some brief definitions here. One important note to talk about this as an introductory note for this, is that when interacting with MKs or with TCKs, MKs missionary kids, TCKs third culture kids, we don't make too much of the things that we'll be talking about in like this webinar. We meet them where they're at, and we're aware that there's more going on than meets the eye, and that helps us, me as a parent to my kids, as well as a youth worker to others' kids, and you as parents of your kids. It helps us understand where they're at, so we can be aware that there's more going on than meets the eye. So we try to avoid labels. In our ministry, we work with a lot of MKs, and we don't use terms like TCKs a lot. We don't talk about this stuff. It's more of information that we gather to understand where kids are coming from. Third culture kid, this comes out of the Pollock book. A third culture kid is a person who has spent a significant part of his or her developmental years outside of the parent's culture. To break that down just briefly, the significant part of developmental years is kind of generally understood to be a term of a year or longer. So if you are on the field and you had or have a child who has only spent a year on the field before moving back to the States, maybe you came with some older children, they would be still be considered TCKs. Developmental years, the idea behind developmental years is really kind of 1 through 18 to 19, kind of all of the childhood years through the teenage years. The third culture kid is a person who has spent a significant part of his or her developmental years outside the parent's culture, and that it's not explicitly stated, but that needs to have been, to classify kind of in this category, a significant part of his or her developmental years at one time. So not going on a bunch of different vacations or missions trips, but having spent at least a year in one place, or at least a year outside of the passport culture, solid. Another term that we often throw around is TCK. Another term is PK, or pastor's kid. And I took this out of Tim Stamford's book, I Have to Be Perfect, and Other Holy Heresies. It's different being in ministry as an adult and being a child with your parents in the ministry. As a minister, you choose the ministry. Your kids had no choice. As a pastor, you have adult coping skills to deal with occupational hazards of your ministry. Your kids only have a child's level of, it's not how you spell of abilities and skills. And when I think of the missionary kid, I think that it combines the two complexities behind the third culture kid and the pastor's kid, so that the MK equals a TCK plus the PK. And combines, that's kind of where we get into, well, we'll talk more about the third culture kid aspect, but understanding that there's also a PK aspect to every third culture kid. And that's, I think it's worth saying, that is true even if, as a missionary parent, you are not involved in pastoral ministry. Even if your job is maintenance on a building, or you lead short-term teams or teach English classes, there's still a real element that a lot of the things that pastors' kids kind of grow up understanding or hearing are similar for missionary kids, just by the nature of being a missionary and having to visit churches or individuals for support. And we can get into all that another time. I just thought that was an important qualification. And then a friend of ours, Brett Taylor, coined, or at least we learned it from him, coined this term OK, which would be, if you're not a TCK, not a PK, not an MK, you're an OK. So my wife likes that. She'll like to say, "Yep, I'm okay." Ordinary kid. That's she likes that one. So we're going to look at 4 skills from Pollock and Van Rieken's book. 4 unique positive skills that the TCK in general, so this is kind of generalized at the third culture kid level, that the TCK walks away with. The first one is our cross-cultural skills. And you might say, okay, sure, yeah, that makes sense. My kid grows up in another culture, and they kind of learn to, understand that culture just like I am doing as an adult. And what makes the TCK's experience or the MK's experience unique in this is that they're going through the same cultural change or geographical change and cultural change from one culture to another culture as you are, but they're doing so at a time when their personalities and character are still very much forming and developing. And they're looking around and noticing things that as adults we might not even notice. This quote comes out of the book, this ability to be sensitive to the more hidden aspects of culture. Well, what are hidden aspects of culture? It could be anything from the distance that you stand away from, the distance between you and another person as you're speaking. What is the appropriate distance to stand? Or does it change when you're sitting? Can you sit closer to someone than when you're standing and talking to someone? Does it change if you are an older adult or a younger child? What is the distance that you stand next to each other? How loud do you speak? That's going to vary in all sorts of cultures. I remember as a kid, there was a team that stopped outside of our house. We had we didn't have a restaurant, but there was a chicken restaurant. And one time a missions team stopped into that restaurant on their way to another part of the country. And I was down there getting some food for our family. And man, they were loud. And the culture where I was in we talked more in hushed tones, especially in restaurants. And they kind of came in and they were having a good time. And sometimes Americans get the stereotype of being loud because it's just a hidden aspect of the culture. Along with cross-cultural skills and closely tied to cross-cultural skills would be observational skills. Third culture kids, for our purposes, missionary kids. And I should add that when I'm speaking of missionary kids in this setting of these webinars, I'm specifically speaking of missionary kids who are third culture kids. So we don't need to get into what exactly is a missionary conversation and kind of home-based missionaries versus international missionaries or cross-cultural missionaries. For our purposes in these conversations, we're going to be looking at missionaries who are missionary kids, MKs who are TCKs. So a lot of these things, all these things about TCKs are going to apply to the MKs in our context. So MKs, TCKs learn that unwritten rules govern everyone's acceptance or rejection in a new setting. For someone who's grown up in their, we call it passport culture, for someone who's grown up in their own passport culture, and maybe you lived in only one or two houses growing up your whole life, which would just be crazy to me. You just naturally learn to play the music, as it were. You just grow up in society without thinking twice about what you're saying or how you're saying it necessarily, and you just you're just a member of the community. TCKs, MKs are very aware that there are unwritten rules in every society. Every culture has them. We go back to the ability to be more sensitive to the hidden aspects of culture. And TCKs actually understand that there is a hidden aspect of culture. They might not be able to tell you or articulate it. It's kind of an intuitive understanding of when you walk into a room, you have to get those unwritten rules right, or you're not going to be accepted. And I think we understand as adults, having grown through the teenage years and through the childhood years, that adults tend to be, not always, but tend to be more forgiving towards other adults than teenagers or younger kids tend to be towards each other, especially in regards to things like faux pas and just social mishaps. Again, just generalization. But this idea that there are unwritten rules that govern everyone's acceptance or rejection in a new setting allows that MK to walk into a room, whether it's a church in Atlanta, a church in Costa Rica, a church in London, a gathering in Johannesburg, and begin to look for those unwritten rules. Just naturally. They don't even realize they're doing it because it's such a part of who they are. Unwritten rules are things like we talked about just a minute ago, those hidden aspects in culture. Hidden aspects in culture can also apply to more value systems as well, and power distance, things that we have to study as adults to try and understand those things that MKs kind of naturally grasp by having grown up in different systems and having to understand at a more core level how it works in different systems and different structures, different cultures. TCKs learn that unwritten rules govern everyone's acceptance or rejection in a new setting. One example that we've used in the past is this idea of if you were in an airport, let's just say you're in Hartsfield-Jackson Airport in Atlanta, and you're in the international terminal, and you see an African gentleman, a black man with a brightly colored kind of flowing robe, and he's walking down the terminal. Maybe he has some sort of a turban on his head, but he's also carrying his suitcase on his head. You might think, oh, that's kind of silly. Why is he doing that? If you were to see in the same terminal a gentleman, a white gentleman who is 5'11", 6 feet tall, dressed sharply in a suit, clean pressed shirt, shiny black shoes, red tie, obviously a man who's here for business, but he were walking with his briefcase on his head, you would think, what in the world is that guy doing? They're just unwritten rules that governs acceptance and rejection in a new setting. If you were to walk into church on any given Sunday, and you were to come in the middle of the sermon, you got there late, and you began to interrupt everyone's reading of the scripture as they follow along with the pastor, to shake everyone's hand, all the way up to the church, even to the point of interrupting the pastor from his sermon to shake his hand, you would think, wow, that'd be pretty rude, probably. Where I grew up, if you came into a church setting and you did not interrupt everyone's time in the word, if you did not go around and shake every single person's hand in the church, and if you did not care enough to interrupt the speaker to give him the decency of saying hello to him and to shake his hand, that was a huge deal, a huge offense. That's an unwritten rule that governs your acceptance or rejection in a new setting. Greetings like that. How long do you hold a handshake? Unwritten rule. With women, men with women in Latin America and women with women, oftentimes the kiss on the cheek. Which side of the cheek? You don't want to get that one wrong. You don't want to be on the other page of the person who's trying to give you the kiss on the left side and you go for the right. Unwritten rules that govern the acceptance or rejection in a new setting. This even can get applied to the use of technology today, but we need to move on. Social skills, another skill that TCKs, MKs kind of grow up with, is that since many have moved in and out, in and among various cultural worlds so often, that while they may not know every detail of the local culture, they can see beyond that to the humanity in front of them. What an important skill. What an asset to grow up with as we seek to serve Jesus Christ in 2017 and beyond. I mean, in a world where where the Facebook posts are so politically charged, where we can't see people for who they are, but for what they're doing and how they look and how they act. Lots of MKs have been in a situation where everyone at church maybe doesn't smell so good. Not necessarily in Costa Rica. Here in Costa Rica, it's very, very clean. But where I grew up, man, like you go to church and if someone didn't shower, well, it's because it was really cold in the morning. They only had cold water, and they wait till later on in the day for some people. The ability to see past skin color, to see past things that would cause, to see past the unwritten rules that would cause our rejection of someone, if we were to think back to the observational skills, and to see beyond just, well, that's a different people and that's a foreign people, to those are people. What an important, what a unique and valuable skill and valuable asset to grow up with, and to just intuitively understand that. That's the thing that's hard for what we call OKs to grasp about TCKs and MKs, is that so much of this is just going to be intuitive. They don't even necessarily understand that not everyone can do this. And not everyone can do this. A lot of this has, we go to conferences to learn about the fact that trainings to go into missions, to learn about the fact that there are unwritten rules, to learn about the fact that if you offend someone's culture, they won't listen to the message that you're bringing. A lot of MKs just grow up naturally. Well, of course, why doesn't everybody understand that? And that's a great asset to grow up with. Finally, last skill from Pollock and Van Rieken, linguistic skills. And when we think of learning a language, oftentimes we think as adults of communicating. Why do we want to learn the language? We have a lot of missionaries that come in and out of the Spanish Language Institute here in San Jose, Costa Rica. Why do that? Well, why are we learning the language? Well, we learn the language so we can communicate the gospel, and so we can have conversations and build relationships with people. And that's true, and that's great. And children, again, quote from the Pollock book, children who learn 2 or more languages early in life and use these languages on a day-to-day basis develop a facility and ease with language unlike those who learn a second language for the first time as adults. When Maggie and I went on her internship in Ecuador, after we got married, she still had her internship to complete to graduate, and we moved. We didn't move. We moved for a month back to Ecuador, and we lived in a Salasaka Quechua village, and we were the only white people living in the village. Everyone else was Quechua. It was a very closed community. The only reason we were allowed to be there was because of the connections we had with the Wycliffe missionaries who were working on Bible translation. And one of our responsibilities, one of our tasks while we were there as part of the internship for learning purposes, was to begin to learn the Quechua language. And I had more familiarity with it, having grown up in Ecuador and my parents working with the Quechua people, but I had never actually even necessarily tried to learn beyond the basic greetings and hello, goodbye sort of thing. It's very, very different than Spanish, very, very different. Maggie was a linguistics major at Moody Bible Institute, and she spent her time there acquiring skills and tools to learn languages. But I was just picking the language up in a way that the missionary who had his master's degree in second language acquisition was just really impressed with, and in a way that really, really frustrated my wife. And a lot of that, I think, is because of this idea that when I was young, I came into a new setting and I had to learn another language. And so to learn additional languages is a lot easier. Also, I think I might have just gotten ahead of myself there. Well, but the other thing is related. What the first point is talking about is also related to the second point. Children who learn one language well can often go on to learn others at a very deep level. When children learn languages, they instinctively pick up the nuances of how people in that culture think and relate to one another. In our Western modern mindset, we often, in the utilitarian nature of things, we often think of language as a purely communication device. It is the means by which we communicate with other people. Failing to realize that language is inherently cultural, and culture fills language. And as second language learners, as adults, it's very, very difficult to pick up on what those nuances of the culture, how people think, and how the language relates to people think. Whereas as a child who is learning the language and interacting with people in that language, in that culture, over and over, day in and day out, there's an understanding that comes just instinctively of through language, of culture, of how people think and relate to one another. What an incredible gift to be able to pick up different deep cultural nuances, thought patterns, how people relate to different kinds of people, how a child relates to his parents, how a child relates to his grandparents, how parents relate to each other, how people in the church relate to the pastor, how people relate even to a police officer. What a special nuance. These are the 4 skills that I wanted to bring in from Dave Pollock and Ruth Van Rieken's book, The Third Culture Kids. I have some other ones that I jotted down that we're going to buzz through and not really spend any time talking about, and then we'll move to a section of questions. If you're listening and you are a missionary parent, I'd really encourage you to get this book and read through it just to better understand what your child's going through. And I wanted to talk about some of these positive aspects of MKs, just because a lot of times we gravitate towards talking about negative aspects, and we gravitate towards talking about the challenges. And while those are real, and we'll touch on them later as we go on, I just want us to be encouraged that when you see your child having a hard time, when you look at if you ever do this, I know even as an adult MK, I have looked at my child's life and wondered, what am I doing to my kids? That it's not all full of negative experience. And I look at my own MK childhood and I say, that is possibly one of the most valuable things I could ever have gone through. So I'm hoping that we can be encouraged and know that to be a missionary kid, with all of its hardships, to be a third culture kid with all of its hardships, with all of its differences, with all of its nuances, is, in my opinion, one of the greatest gifts that God can give somebody. It can give your children. I mean, it is just unparalleled, and it can't be substituted in other ways. Thank God, thank the Lord for your child's ability to be to be able to experience this. All right, briefly to some other experience, other unique positives of the MK experience, and then I'll go and check the inbox for questions and see if we have any. Again, if you have questions, one of the things that I want to be doing during our time is answering questions at the end. There's an email address, thrivingandresilient@gmail.com. It's in the description of the video. Please send an email with that with your question to that email address, and that's how we're gonna handle questions for today. And then next time that we have a session, I will be hosting it, but I won't be presenting it. And so this is a pilot. I want it to be the one to take the hit if it really just didn't turn out very well, instead of have someone who took the time to help us out in this way have it not go well. All right, here's the Pollock, Dave Pollock and Ruth Van Rieken, Third Culture Kids Growing Up Among Worlds, available in hard copy or Kindle. All right, some other benefits. Watching their parents take faith seriously, and for your kids your kids are always watching you. How I wish that I remember that more often. Our kids are always watching us, and they see the decisions and the hard decisions that you make. Maybe it was easy to go into ministry, but the life-changing decision to go into international ministry, whether you're a missionary from Korea and you move to Peru, or whether you are a missionary from the United States and you move to Senegal, it's a life-changing experience. It's one of the things that we talk about in youth ministry is the importance of parents connecting those faith decisions, those life-changing decisions, to their faith for their students. So do explain the role, the reason that do you understand why we're moving? Do you understand why we left grandma and grandpa? Do you understand the reason that we're doing this is because we trust God with our lives. The reason that we're doing this is because we believe that God has brought us here. And that can have a real profound impact on missionary kids, to connect these life-altering experiences. Wow, my parents believed this so much that they were willing to do this. Rootlessness. One of the downsides of and one of the challenges of growing up as an MK among worlds, as a TCK, moving here and here and here, and is this idea of what do I even call home? And if you want a fun experiment, go around and ask your own MKs or your friends' kids, what do you think of the question, where are you from? And there's this idea of I don't know, because I don't know if I fit in there. In my purposes, I don't really fit in the States. And if I would fit in the States, then I am kind of from Chicago and I'm kind of from Oxford, Ohio. But I'm really, like, my heart is in Ecuador, but like my skin color, and I just get treated differently. And so I don't even know where I'm from, and I don't even know where I want to settle down and where I want to go. The rootlessness points us to the reality that this world isn't our home. And we try and make this world home, but heaven is our home. And we try and make this world heaven, but for the MK, for the third culture kid, there's this reality that this world's just never going to be our home. And what a great thing to point our kids towards Christ, to say, you know what, you feel like you don't belong anywhere. That's because you don't belong here. One day we're all going to go home. One day we'll all be home together. There's the John Guerra song, "This world is not my home. I'm here, but for a moment, though it's all I've ever known, this world is not my home." It's a great song. Other benefits, being able to befriend and relate to many people. It's kind of touched on what we talked about with the Pollock relational skills. Getting to see the world and understand that the world is bigger than the country that is on my passport, and that the church is bigger than my home church in my passport country is huge. And that understanding of there's more outside of me, and the world is bigger than my sphere. You just pick up on it, because that's just normal. Again, that's just natural. Of course it is. Why would we think that the world wasn't bigger than our sphere? Experiences that you've never had. One of the sad things for me in watching my kids grow up in the city and in Costa Rica is that they won't get to have experiences that I had growing up in Ecuador. And I'm sure that that's true for all sorts of people who come from different places. Maybe you're from the States, and there's certain things you love to do when you were a kid that your kids are just never going to get to experience that, or don't experience it in the same way. But on the other hand, they will have experiences that you never got to have. and it helps to flip that around and think on the positive side of that. And lastly, prioritizing relationships over material things. MKs learn pretty fast, I would say, that probably the most important thing in their life are people. It's going to be people. Why? Because they've already had to leave their stuff so many times and sell their things so many times, and so relationships will often take priority over material things. And in today's consumeristic society, what a gift! What a gift to have that already there, and what an opportunity for parents to reestablish that and affirm that relationships, people matter more than things. People matter more than things. All right, that's all that I have to share for today. I'm going to go ahead and check the questions over here, see if we have anybody who had a question, if I can navigate to the right screen. Nope, no questions. I'll give it a couple more minutes in case anyone did have a question that they wanted to ask. And please fill out the survey that's linked in the chat, and that will really help us as we continue to move forward and better serve you as parents of MKs. Specifically thinking of the is this the best format in which to have this discussion? As a YouTube channel, you know what, that's just really easy, or I can go watch it later because I had this thing going on, and I really just want to go ahead and interact with other people and hear from people themselves instead of you reading out questions. Then that would be more of a conference style. But if you really rather just be able to click the link and show up when you want to show up, and there's a sense of anonymity as well, that if you can just watch it, then you don't have to interact with other people, then that works as well. So just wait one more second to see if there are questions. No questions. All right. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. I hope it is as warm and sunny where you are as it is here in Costa Rica. God bless. Our next session, it will be the second Friday in March, and we'll be joined by Carolyn Umarian. And Aunt Carolyn was a missionary when I was a kid growing up in Ecuador. She taught at an MK school at the Alliance Academy for many, many years, and now serves as the education consultant for Avant Ministries. And so I asked her if she would come and share with us about your children's education and just what are some things to be thinking about as specifically for teenagers might be getting ready for college. So have a wonderful day, and God bless.